Welcome back again to the module 3.2 of the Safe Learning Facilities module number 3. As discussed before, we're going to be talking today about the community-based safe school construction. We saw in the previous two videos the synergy between new schools and existing schools, and what are the key steps for safe learning facilities. Sorry for the confusion. And now we're going to be talking about the community-based safe school construction. So why community-based safe school construction? Why this approach? So we believe, and many people, it's completely in this idea that as much involvement of the community is in every single step of planning, designing, strategizing, implementing, monitoring any action for disaster risk reduction, it's the possibilities of effectiveness of that policy is bigger. And on school construction, community can really provide a lot of services in order to secure that we're going to have safe schools. So community-based construction covers a spectrum of possible community involvement that goes from making informed programmatic planning and design decisions to directly taking part in building constructions. Communities may receive funding, technical assistance, and other support from government agencies or development organizations. So why we use a community-based approach? Why is recommended to use? The first, because communities are at the core of disasters, of the impacts of disasters. When a disaster strikes unsafe schools, is the community students that are harmed, are the community's education assets that are lost. It will be their children experiencing trauma and losing their schools. And communities intimately understand how this damage can delay community aspirations for years to come. So, as I mentioned before, this is a long spectrum of that. But also, what is important here to say is that the role that the schools plays in the community. As you can see, from many years, schools are the places where different members of the community met because they have their children there, so it's an opportunity to discuss about different elements of the day-to-day life, like about political issues, economic issues, new opportunities. Community gets together at the schools. It was a role that another institution in communities was playing before, that was, for instance, churches or religious places. Nowadays, this place is being taken by the schools. So the schools playing a very important role on community development and on securing community resilience of communities. And this is why it's very important to involve as much as possible all of the elements of the community in school safety. So how communities will benefit from this kind of approach? So the first and more important thing, and it goes in relation about what I was mentioning, is that through the involvement of the community on the different steps for building or securing school buildings, we are creating social capital, the community capital, that capital that allows community to become more resilient, to trust more between the different members of the community, to better understand the needs that they have, but also the needs of others, and really being as much as inclusive as possible. Why? Because when we use a community-based approach, we are acknowledging that communities are the best place to know what is happening in their environment, in their context, what are the capabilities that they have, who knows to do what, who is expert on what are the different elements that we need, what are our customs, what we use, who is in more danger, who is more vulnerable, etc., etc. Similarly, when you involve community, you are foster a sense of ownership as community take part in planning and design stage. It's not like schools don't come by ovnis and they put it there and they go. But the schools, when we are in a project of building schools in that community and engage in that community, also will give the opportunity to the community members to engage in the whole process and feel part that they are building their own community. So this is very important. Similarly, the community can benefit because if they are involved in some of the aspects of the construction, they can gain experience with the materials and construction techniques that they can replicate later on their own houses. They get a better understanding about what are the physical vulnerabilities of their schools, and therefore they can replicate that understanding in their own places. And when seeing how problems are solved in schools, they can replicate that in their own places. So it's a way about how we transfer through schools knowledge and techniques that can be later on replicated on their own households. Similarly, in the community, local laborers can find employment opportunities to improve their skills. So not only normal jobs that will be related to the construction, but also they can be doing that jobs working in the construction by learning other things that will improve their experience, and they can get to another kind of other constructions. Similarly, and this is very important as well, when we bring the community, we bring transparency and accountability. So those communities that has been trained to follow the whole processes are better positioned to monitor school constructions. They pass every day by the same place. They know what is happening. They know what is the schedule. They know what is necessary to be done, what are the materials, and if something they consider that is not going as it was planned or as it was said, but they can be the first ones to to communicate this to the related authority. So it's a good way to secure transparency and accountability. Similarly, in the case of post-disaster, when communities get involved, they come together to rebuild, helping to relieve the trauma, stress, and hopelessness felt after a disaster. So when they are involved in these kind of activities, I think some links that can be rebuild this trust and this social capital and community capital that we mentioned before. And all of these aspects, in a way, create a community learning opportunity for disaster risk reduction that in the end is the final step that we would like to see. Okay, so then there are, of course, like in every single approach, we have some kind of challenge, but also some kind of advantage for a community-based safe school approach. So for instance, concerning the finance aspect, localized financial control may limit the capacity for redistribution of financial resources across communities. So for instance, those communities that are better prepared, better strengthened, better organized, can try to receive most of the resources because it's going to be easier to work for them. And sometimes people prefer to be secure that funding is going where things will be implemented. Also, where communities lack training in financial management, it is important to provide training before construction started, because if not, we can get more complications. If we're going to decentralize really the whole resources and funding to these communities and they don't have these skills to manage financial resources, that could be very complicated. Nevertheless, one of the advantages in terms of the finance is that there is proven to be cost effective in comparison to contractual systems where contractors' overheads, profits, and bank guarantees can increase costs by more than 15%. So in a way, they are cheaper because of this transaction cost that we can diminish, but we need to secure that we manage the challenge, that we are equitable with all of the communities around, but similarly that we train these people in order to use well the money. In terms of equity, the challenge are that we can have a decentralized and community-based strategies that may increase inequality between communities, as we expressed in the finance aspect, as each will rely more heavily on uneven levels of local knowledge and resources. For instance, some communities where you have really engineers, where you have people that have been working on construction, to other communities that don't have these capacities, and if we try to target those with better capacities, we can create some inequalities in them. Can shift responsibilities to local people with limited capacity or other priorities. So when there are governments that decentralize everything to the communities without taking into consideration the need for capacity building, sometimes they also transfer the responsibilities, knowing that the mandate is a national mandate and a local mandate to provide education as a service. In many of the countries, it's part of their constitutions, and as we saw on the first model, it's part of the human rights and then the child rise. So sometimes transferring the responsibility to communities make that the responsibilities are transferred to people without no capacities. Similarly, they can exacerbate pre-existing inequalities in social divisions, including ethnic, gender-based, ethnic, or religious divisions. For instance, in communities that are very diverse, and if there is a specific approach and support for one specific ethnic and not to another ones, that can create some kind of problem. The advantage about a community-based safe school approach in terms of equity is that if we do it in a good way, it can share power between communities and government agencies or development actors that can ensure community needs and preferences are addressed. So in a way, it puts the communities at the same level of the governmental agencies and development actors, and in a situation that made them feel more comfortable. Also, it promotes a shared responsibility. It's not only like we wait from the government to do, but in a way, it's like we as a community, we organize in order to support the government to implement this. So it's kind of like really living democracy, living the way how government do the things that they need to do with the engagement of the communities and the roles and responsibilities that the community will have. Similarly, can increase community awareness of the rights to information and decision-making power, so they can better understand what are the rights of the communities, and they can base it on that understanding on the right. They can really support decision-making that will favorize the community. In terms of quality, what is the challenge in terms of quality? So when local craft people lack adequate knowledge of hazard-resistant design and construction techniques, a school construction may replicate the vulnerabilities found in local private sector construction. So when there is not good training, when there is not good follow-up, what we can do is perpetuating the same mistakes that are putting schools under vulnerable situations. The advantage is that if we do it well, we can improve the visual quality of construction in comparison to school buildings constructed by external contractors. So we can really, if we manage that the quality will be secure, we can really bring more quality and engagement from the community in order that it will be, in terms of quality wise, will be better than it would do it for an external partner in terms of the engagement that they have and the ownership of their own schools. In terms of sustainability, one of the challenges when initiated by non-government actors, government accountability to citizens can be undermined. So it's an issue of accountability, the sustainability and the accountability. And this is something that we need to take into consideration, because normally governments have the mandate for that. But when there is not the government and we launch a process of making a new school or retrofitting on schools, and this confidence is not, this accountability doesn't exist, that could be a good challenge, a great challenge. Without clearly defined responsibilities for operation and maintenance, schools buildings can deteriorate. Why? Because if the challenge is that, for instance, if we don't have involved a local government or somebody that will take care of that school after the construction of that school, the sustainability challenge here is that we will not have the resources, neither the plan to really secure maintenance on that school. And when not properly supported, the process can burden community with learning skills like construction management and procurement that may have limited transferability. So another challenge that we will need to check if we want to check a community-based safe school construction. The advantage here in terms of sustainability is that when we involve the community gets more ownership, and there is a wider community involvement in its implementation, but also on the maintenance. They can infuse enhanced construction practice into communities' skills that may transfer to residential and other constructions, as I was mentioned before, and helps to ensure strategies that are accepted and appropriated for the community. So that means that you reduce the problems that can be caused, that can be emerge after the finalization of the construction process. So in the long term, you're going to have better sustainability, political sustainability in terms of the core aspects of the school safety. So what is the community-based process? So let's first identify the key actors. So the school community, and when we are talking about the school community, we are talking, of course, about the children, the teachers, the administrative staff, but also parents, all the small economies that goes around the schools, the community itself. This is what we call the school community. Then local government that are in the specific place of that school. The central government who has the mandate on education. Technical professionals that can help and that can be used as a resource for the construction. Policy and decision makers that can provide that policy necessary, or those that can support the decision to a project to be having this community approach. Development organizations and actors that are supporting school safety in some communities, and the program managers, that one that has the responsibility to implement the project from 0 until 100, so until the end, from the beginning until the end. He has another possibilities to he is a key actor, and he will have a lot of benefits to be part of this community-based approach. But as we say, each of the stakeholders that we are mentioning here has challenge and some incentive for supporting a community-based approach. So I'm not going to mention all of them, but I just want for you to see some of them. For instance, the school community, some of the challenge, the low risk awareness. They are not very familiar about hazards, notably if there are communities that are new on that specific site. Maybe they have a lack of confidence in risk reduction techniques. And this is something that in a way can be changed for an incentive, like safety of self and school age family members, acquisition of hazard resistant construction knowledge and skills, and also local jobs, as we mentioned in the previous slide. So there are a lot of challenges that need to be overseen and taken into consideration that some of the actors will pose in the implementation of this approach, but this challenge can be better addressed with the incentive that this can be provided. For instance, going back, technical professionals. So they need the challenge is the higher investment of time needed compared to common and safe practice. So sometimes when you are doing a safe practice, you will need more time to do that. But the incentive is that by doing that, you will gain an academic interest, you're going to have an income generation, an analysis, site planning, and hazard resistant design that will help you to improve your knowledge on these areas. So I invite you to check this table with the different challenge and incentive that different actors can have on a community-based safe school construction. Then let's go really to the whole picture about community safe approach. So normally in a community-based safe school approach for new buildings or for retrofitting buildings, we're going to have 5 main steps: strategic planning and mobilization, community planning, community design, community construction, and post-construction. And we have 3 levels. We have many actors, but we have categorized it in 3 big groups. The government agencies that will provide the necessary policies, standards, codes, technical experts, approvals, inspections, and oversight, and notably funds most of the time. Local community that can provide preference, understanding about the context, labor as well, local knowledge, a good understanding about what is happening in that community itself. And then other aspects like implementing organizations, including private sector, including NGOs, including other actors that can really be providing training, funding, experts, program managers, and also the required material and the quality material that we will need for the implementation of this. So this is the actors, and this is the 5 steps that normally we will implement when we are doing a community-based safe school construction. So in the first stage that we will have here, is the stage of the strategic planning and community mobilization. This is in the first part of the strategic planning and mobilization. So in the strategic planning and mobilization, we have different stages that are mentioned before here: the diagnostics, the tools identifications, the raise awareness, and the form school management committee. So on this one, in the strategic planning and community mobilizations, one of the challenge is the inaccurate and understanding of risk or ineffective risk communication. So there are people in the community that really don't know what will be required, or really why we are trying to build safer schools, why we cannot build a school that will be cheap and easy because we have other priorities in the community. So we need to face that challenge by building community risk awareness about the different elements that can provide risk there. And also it's a good way in order that you can communicate the level of risk that community will have. Another challenge in the mobilization, in the strategic plan and community mobilization when you are doing the diagnostic. The lack of short-term benefit caused by a focus on future risk. So as I mentioned before, we need to increase knowledge of risk and reduction strategies. The idea is not to focus too much on hazards and community vulnerability, but emphasize on the benefits that building safer schools will have to the whole community. Challenge, cost. No, sometimes the time that is implemented is higher. The aesthetics that is provided by some of the preference that the community will have, or other concerns may be more highly valued than the school safety. So that is a challenge that we need to address. So one of the advantages on the strategic planning and community mobilization is that if we do it in the diagnostics, we can provide community oversight of the safe school construction project. So we can build a commitment to comprehensive school safety at the formation of the committee while also recognizing the importance of other community priorities. Why is the importance in the diagnostics? To understand the broad physical, social, cultural, and political environment in which the program of a new schools or a retrofitting will occur. A second, concerning the second stage that is on community planning, where we're going to have needs assessment, feasibility study, and draft implementation plan. Of course, we're going to have other challenge and another disadvantage. Here in the community planning, the most important is to identify community goals. This stage also lays the groundwork for a safer school by assessing the school site for hazards and identifying what community training is needed. So what are the challenges here? There are challenges concerning, for instance, the local acceptance of poor materials and unsafe construction practices. So there is a normal and traditional ancestor that this material is good. We don't need to prove another one that is more expensive. So it's a challenge that we have to measure on this specific element. The advantage that in the community planning, when we are doing the identifications of community goals, we can really see how we can uncover context-specific challenge and potential solutions. So in a way, we are trying to orient school management committees to hazard-resistant constructions and work with local resources people and external experts to identify the weaknesses in local materials and construction practices. So we can see from one side, the use of a traditional, not very safe material, and that people is very attached to it. And one of the challenge, the advantage is that also we can understand other kind of materials that are really proving to be very resistant, even if they're not understood like that. For instance, in my country, in Colombia, there are communities that use bamboo because it's very flexible, and bamboo is very good to seismic areas. But this is something that, for instance, they don't teach too much in civil engineering schools. So by understanding the use of certain materials that are used in the community and that prove to be resilient and help to provide the resilience to the school safety, we can be getting a better understanding about new materials, but at the same time, we can be using those materials that are really coming from the community. So we are really avoiding extra costs for importing a material that we don't need and that can prove to be very efficient. So in stage number 3 on community design. So while technical specialists ensure the functionality and safety of the design because it's a very specialized plan on the design of the school itself or on the retrofitting techniques, communities make other design decisions and learn how design choices can increase the hazard resistance of the schools. So this is very important because in a way it's not only about the designs, the calculations, about what will be included, on the different engineering and architectural aspects of the schools, but it's also about in the design, including the views of the community. Some of the particular challenges that we're going to have here with involving the community. For instance, communities may perceive design stage as too technical for community involvement. They say, like, no, look at this, it's very technical, this is about calculation, this is about, we don't want to be part of these things. The advantage is that ensures community needs and values, and it guides the project. So the strategy here is to use culturally appropriate language to communicate and design alternatives. Clarify how communities' involvement in designs help the school to address local concerns and preference while maintaining the safety as the top priority. So every stage will have some challenge and some advantage and some strategies that we are proposing, and I will advise you to read all of them in order to see. Concerning stage number 4, that is about community construction, so about really about the core aspect of construction or retrofitting. So the community-based approach must carefully pair construction activities with worker trainers and a transparent oversight process. It's very important that depending who will develop the construction, the community will be involved. If they're gonna be part of the construction, the training will be done. If they are going to be not part of the construction because it's going to be given to a external contractor, but that they be following and monitoring that construction. So that is very important in this area. So there are some challenge. I'm just gonna mention one, for instance, that training add cost and time to the project, and skills may be inappropriately applied later. So the advantage is that your transfer hazard resistant construction skills to the community. So even if the training costs a little bit more and take time, and if they is not do it properly, can produce some issues later on, the transfer of knowledge and skills can be very beneficial, not only for schools, but for general to the whole community. So we see some challenge, some advantage, and some strategies in order to overcome this thing. And on the last stage, that is on post-construction operations, maintenance, and safety. But in a community-based approach, communities need to learn how to use and maintain their safer schools in a post-construction stage. It's very important that after the construction is finished and the engagement of the community keep theirs and maintain there, they can understand what are the needs for the schools in terms to maintain it as much as possible as new. And they understanding that, they can be very involved on the school activities and also understand how they need to maintain their own houses when they are applying these specific techniques. So some challenge. The assumptions that safety efforts end with constructions. And this is a big challenge. The safety finish when we finish the construction, and you know that this is not true. One of the advantages to involve the community that build and sustains a culture of safety within and beyond the schools, as I was mentioning, that they can bring to their own households. And as that is, a strategy could be to ask that the school management committees displays their continued commitment to comprehensive school safety through commemorative events, months, and even years after the school competitions. Involves local officials, so create these links between the community and local officials and original stakeholders to monitoring of safer school projects and their ongoing impact. So there are these 5 stages. Each of them there have the challenge that we see, some advantage that the community school safety construction will bring, this approach, and some strategies that we would like you to get in deep in the analysis to that. So we have been seeing that in every single stage of this, there are some cross-cutting efforts. So for instance, on the prominence of, on the 5 stage, if you see, the community participations will be higher on the community planning step because they are helping to identify the hazards, to identify the needs and capacities, to select the sites. They know better what are the areas where the flooding happens. They know better where are the areas that are more difficult when there is a particular some winds. So the engagement there is very important there. On the awareness level, so the first and the most important will be on the strategic planning and community mobilization, because we will need that the community understand the hazards, understand the needs for and possibility of safe schools. And this awareness, if you do it well since the beginning, then the involvement of the prominence of increasing awareness will go with the years similarly, but will not be so much necessary as at the end. It's also cross-cutting for instance, when you are building the capacities, notably if you are using the community for the construction. So you can bring capacities in the community planning in order to secure that the community has all the skills to do the management of the project, but on the construction, all the skills to build actually the schools. And in the post-construction, of course, they have the skills to maintain these specific elements. On the prominence of formalizing and scaling up. So that will be the development of community normal goals at the end of the process, on the last stage of the construction. Not only because we need that they scale up and formalize in order to develop maintenance plans to maintain safer school construction in government framework for school management, so that they can secure that the school has been built in a good way, and that now they will have all the resources for maintaining it as it is. So how is a community-based school construction program run? So there are the different 5 stages of construction that I told you: mobilization, planning, design, construction, and post-construction. And now we're going to analyze each of the elements within each of them. So in the mobilization, so the diagnostics that is important, it is important that in every single project, either for a new construction or for a retrofitting, there will be an analysis of the education sector, how the education sector is implementing their activities in that specific area or community that we are trying to see. A contextual analysis, what is the context where we gonna be implementing this? There are some frictions between some members of the communities. What is the context? We are talking with people that are new, there are immigrants, there are people that are here for many years. We need to mobilize people that maybe come from different contexts, and we need to understand that. We need to do an analysis of the stakeholders. Who is there? Do we have the private sector very present there? There is not private sector. Do we have academic institutions like TVET, universities that we can count on? Do we have a good representation of the government institutes that can provide support on overseeing the project, on the design, on the standards that we need to check? That is very important. An analysis of school construction. So we need to see, when we are mobilizing, what has been the different constructions that has been implemented in that region, who has done it, with which support has been the community involved before. So an analysis about how school construction has been developed in that specific area. Similar, we need, at the moment of doing the mobilization, we need to identify what are the tools that we're going to use during the whole process, the community safe school construction process. So do we have hazard awareness tools? We saw already before about different tools for risk assessment, but do we have other tools that help us to increase the awareness of the hazards that are there in the community? Do we have tools that increase the school facility safety? Tools that has been applied in the community, what is there? Procurement and financial management tools. Do the community, for instance, has been following courses about how to manage projects on a community base? Or do we have institutions or associations that can provide this kind of training and this kind of tools? Construction training tools. Do we have materials, tools, videos, guidelines, tutorials, or even TVET institutions or other kind of institutions that can provide the training and tools necessary for construction training and construction supervision, or tools for oversight? Do we have these tools already there, or how we can try to adapt some of the tools for checking the supervision and the oversight of the project? Raising awareness is another key important of mobilization. So we need to identify the stakeholders, as I mentioned before, and assess the current knowledge of what they know about the school construction and about how to implement the school construction project. We need to frame the message and convey it to the public. We need to be very careful about how we're going to mobilize the community, how we're going to mobilize the different actors, stakeholders, and to secure that the main message is to provide safe school construction for that community. Hold an orientation meeting is a good strategy. You can have a meeting in which when you invite members of the community, people that you know that play a leadership role there, but also members of the government, of the local government, people that can, some of the stakeholders that can help us to mobilize these specific elements. And that is where we can begin the dialogue between community and experts. So it's a good way about raising awareness, is bringing everybody on board, trying to understand what will be the challenge, the advantage, what the strategies, what can implement, and trying to understand the views of what the community needs and how they can get involved in the whole project. So the next element to be taken in the mobilization is activating and reactivating or forming a schools management committee. So all of the stakeholders and the key actors that we have listed before in the community-based safe school construction need to collaborate with each other through an engagement framework that clearly defines the roles and responsibilities of each of these actors. Without this framework of responsibilities, programs may stall or key activities may be overlooked. And normally in those communities, there are already some committees that has been formed before, or if not, it will be very important to create this committee. This committee needs to secure that you have representation of the different stakeholders and the different views, because if, for instance, we have communities on which one there are clear divisions, we need to secure that all of the visions of that are part of the committee. So, and what do we want from that community to that school management committee? Not only to be informed or consulted about the project, but also they should be part of the primary decision-making body on the safe school construction projects and collaborate with the program manager. And this is the main responsibilities of the school management committee that will help us to better understand. It will be kind of the institution that will secure the community engagement on the new constructions or in the retrofitting projects that we would like to develop in the school. So now, passing to the second stage, that is the stage of planning. So the first thing that we need to do is a need assessment. And these needs assessments needs to be based on really particular questions that we would like to provide. Like, are existing schools buildings vulnerable to hazards? Do we understand that? Have existing buildings been damaged by disasters before? Do students have trouble accessing education because of distance or dangers they face while commuting to schools? What grades will a new school serve? Does the school building need to serve multiple functions? For instance, as shelters during hazards, even if it's not recommended, or a community gathering point? Can the school rectify existing education inequalities by enhancing access for girls, minorities, disabled children, or others? Due to the remoteness or cultural customs, does the building need to include teacher housing or other auxiliary features like large meeting halls, gymnasium, kitchens, a religious space? That is very important to understand. What innovations or community aspirations does the community want the school to include? For example, should the school include gardens, rainwater harvesting, electricity generator, or specific cultural elements? What will make a positive learning environment? So we need to pose all these questions when we are doing the planning, and these questions that are related to the community itself, to the understanding that the community has on the vulnerabilities, on the different hazards, but also about their needs that they want to be reflected on the school construction. So that these needs that they have, they need to be reflected there. So we need, in the planning, we need to develop a feasibility study. So we need, as I mentioned before, to do an assessment of the community. Who are the leaders? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the people that can contribute to that? Feasibility study in terms of the hazard assessment of the local communities, the hazard assessment that is provided by the information that provide the local communities. As I mentioned before, they know where the last hazard impacted the community, what were the effects, where the water was, where was the buildings that fell, which trees fell under where and now. So they can give us information from the community that can allow us to better understand the hazards. And of course, this needs to be combined with hazard specialists, with the information that we will have from the meteorological agency, from the universities, from the geological survey, and for all of those that has been implemented hazard assessments in a more technical way. We need to make a feasibility study in order to have that, to be sure that we will have the mandate for safety, so that everybody agrees with the interpretation of safety that we would like to provide, and that to that performance objective that we would like to have. We need to have as well a site assessment and selection of the site that we would like to be implemented here. We need to also check in this feasibility study all the problems that may be been raising during the construction or the retrofitting. We need also to check what are the materials that we have and what are the capacities in that specific community. Do we have technical capacities that will help us on the construction or on the financial part or on the monitoring and overseeing? We need to create those capacities. The materials, these materials that we are planning to include in the design aspects are available. What materials do we have here? Do we have bamboo? Do we have wood? Do we have different elements that can be used and that are locally produced for our construction? And on that, we have to check cost, quality, labor capacities, material availability, community preference, capacity building potential that we have. Can we rely in some technical institutions or universities to develop this capacity, these training capacities that we need? So that is something that we will need to include in the planning part. Pre-design community consultation is something that we need to include now in the third part on the design. So we need to do a school site investigation that involves the community and that we can understand their views on that. On the building performance objectives, we need to be very transparent about what is the objective that we want. If the community finds that, the school is the only place where shelter can be found in the case of an emergency, so we need, based on the needs of the community, make the design at the level that it will be at the highest performance objective, and also the community context. This is something that we need to include on the pre-design community consultation. In the design as well, we need to have a schematic design. So we need to develop preliminary design alternatives based on budget, performance objectives, and community preference. And that designs, they need to try to focus on developing feasible alternative designs that leave room for modifications with the possibility that we can enlarge the school, that the population will increase, etc., etc. What is important here? Also to try to be as much as possible using designs that are really the most pragmatical and easy to develop. Like for instance, in the case of seismic hazard, all of these designs that are not basic forms like squares, cubes, boxes, they generate complications in the movement of the structures, making that they can collapse easily. So we need to try to see that the designs meet the performance objectives, the budget that we have, the community preference, but at the same time meet the standards and guidelines that we need. And for that, we need to try to be as pragmatical as possible. So trying to make the whole combination and balance between the different elements that need to be incorporated in the schematic design. On the design finalization, so we need to develop templates for designs. Maybe there are already some that are provided by the government that say, like, look, you need to fulfill this template on which one you're going to give me all the details of the design that you're going to implement. They can be direct design for standard materials that can be included on the building codes, and direct design for non-standard materials that could be not included in the building code and that need the recommendations or the advisory and the signature of the approval of a special person like an engineer on that. It's very important to consider non-structural building components like false ceilings, like ornaments that can be attached to the structure, but that can generate any kind of problems here. On the design, also, we need to select the construction management strategy. So it's the community who will manage the whole project of construction. If it's like that, there is a high community involvement. We're going to have a contractor that is going to manage the construction. But here we're going to have a moderate community involvement because we would like that they supervise, and if possible that the constructor, the company, can also hire some of the people from the community in order that they can be employed by this consultancy. Or we're going to do an agency direct build, so they will take care of the whole project since the beginning, and the involvement of the community is very low here. So, but even if you decided to have a contractor management or an agency direct build, it is important to involve communities, even if you are not doing a community-based approach, because all of these things that we have been discussing before, trying to get the views of the community and building a culture of resilience. On the construction aspect that we will be, let's say, the fourth stage of this community safe school approach. So it's very important to build the local capacities. It is very important to train construction workers either on the new techniques, on the new technologies, or on things that they don't know, if the people from the community. We need to train also local technical specialists and officials, not only on the aspects, but for them to understand why safer, why there are some elements that will increase some kind of cost, but that will secure some safety. So for instance, how to understand what is the concrete mix proportioning, how many we need to put of this material, water, etc., in order to secure that the concrete will be with the perfect mix proportioning. What are the char ties that we use in order to do the connections for building walls in an earthquake setting? How we do the tie down straps for a roof? So all of these elements need to be training to the construction workers, as well as much as possible to the community, so that they can replicate this in their homes, but also because they need to understand what is happening in order to monitor the different elements of the construction, and also to train in local technical specialists and officials that they also need to understand what are these practices, even if they are not engineers. So with more reason we need to do that. On the construction as well, what we need to do, the construction monitoring. So monitoring at site, so important inspection points include design and foundation preparation. It's important that either the community or the experts or the third party that will be monitoring there will be there by the selection of the site and the foundation preparation. On the post foundations phase, on the wall or framing stage of the construction, on the roofing, and in the completion. And it's also important to have a construction management strategy that will include this monitoring at site. So not only they need to be monitoring on the whole part of the process, but also on the strategy that will be implemented for the construction. So what another element on the construction, so the practice and communicate safety. So safer schools, as we mentioned before, are an opportunity to both practice a culture of safety and showcase hazard-resistant building practices long after the school building is completed. So during construction, program managers should ensure appropriate health and safety procedures are in place to protect construction workers and the wider community. So it's very important, that we try to keep this idea of safety and resilience in every single step that we are doing there. Not only because we are constructing a school, but in order to secure and start generating this culture of safety. For instance, on fencing or other method of securing the site should be used to protect community members, especially curious children, from dangerous construction conditions. So we need to also, fence a little bit the construction in order to avoid that we're going to have any kind of problems during the construction. And construction materials should be safely stored to protect people, but also to ensure that materials do not deteriorate or go missing. So we need to start putting this culture of safety and building these practices in order that people in the community can incorporate this as an element that they can really make it in the long term. So on the post-construction, what is important here? As we mentioned before, the development of maintenance and user manuals. So we need to design a team and construction workers. The design team and the construction workers, they understand the best the building materials and the structural system. So they should draft a schedule for maintenance based on those materials and structural system that they have built. And school management committees that we mentioned before should establish the maintenance schedules and determine what funds from which sources will be allocated to those activities. It's very important to develop this in the post-construction phase. And similar, we need to have in the post-construction the completion and handover. The handover is very important in legal aspects, but as well on celebratory actions. For instance, tenure, who is the owner of the school? Who is the owner of the land? Is the government? Is the community? We need to be careful because sometimes, some ministers of education has been having some challenge because they don't know who owns the property. Sometimes the property is from the department and sometimes the land is from the community. so, or from the commune, from the local government. And these disparities on who owns what, it's very important to understand it. And when we finish, to secure that the owner of the school will have the necessary documents that accredit him as the institution that owns the land and the construction. So the contractor should first hand over the schools to the contract holder. That this is what we are mentioned here, and we need to understand who is the contract owner. If that one's that it, normally most of the time is the same owner from the land and from the construction. Most of the times are the local governments. Sometimes are the national governments. But there are specific cases where we can have different setups that we need to take into consideration. And when the contractor finish and hand over the schools to the contractor holder, let's say to the local government, they need to sign, this completion certificate, which is very important because on that certificate they testify, they prove that they have following the standards and that the school is safety. These certificates are very important also for insurance purposes. Insurance companies will require the completion certificate in order to insure the building and the services that are there. So it's very important that this completion certificate will be signed and give it to the contract holder. Then when the contract holder is not a government agency, the completed school should then be passed to the appropriate local government agency for formal steps to open the school. So we need to see, to open the schools, we don't need only an infrastructure, we need also teachers, we need services, we need who is going to pay the bills for that, who is going to secure fooding, who is going to secure all of the elements that we need to not only have the schools as a building, but as to serve as an education facility. When the government agency needs to assign students and staff to the site and provide operations and maintenance funds, this is another very important element because there is somebody that needs to take care of maintenance. So we need to know who is going to be that agency at the local level, who will be dealing with that, or is the community itself. So how are we going to organize ourselves in order to secure the maintenance, to secure the operation of the school? Very, very important. And the final handover is to the school community itself, to the principals, to the students, to the manager committees, to the school boards, to the teachers, to all of the people that will take advantage of these schools. And on that is very necessary to have all the roles and responsibilities for monitoring the deterioration and repairing of it, but also for them to try to get more empowered and feel kind of ownership of their own school. They saw it since the beginning, since the planning process until the post-construction, that they were part of it, and now they want to maintain it. So it will be good to give roles and responsibilities to this part of the community. What we need to develop as well, a maintenance plans. So what strategies we can do for maintenance plans? Of course, we need to have a maintenance plan with resources, with dates, with frequencies, etc., etc. But there are other strategies on which one we can maintain the link with the community. For instance, we can establish an annual Safe School Days when the students and teachers and parents come together and repair some issues that are really small issues in the school, but that also provide a good moment for raising awareness. We can have the older students to provide ongoing monitoring as a classroom activity. So we can have that part of the activities go to check the schools where you see issues with the roof, with the windows, etc., etc. We can use the World Disaster Risk Reduction Day on 13 October to review school safety and address problems. So we can take, commemorations, community, etc., in order to raise awareness about the infrastructure, about the learning facility. We can have a community work day on which one people from the community really contribute with a day work in order to solve some of the problems. And we can establish income generating activities in order to, that the school can pay by itself for minor reparations that they will need, a window that was broken, etc., etc. So we can create pools that involve the community at the school level, but also the large community, in order to secure that these small fees and expenses that we will need to secure the maintenance of the schools are there. So in the post-construction, what we need as well to support for a culture of safety at the school. So we need to have some strategies for community-based maintenance of schools with minimal resources. So for instance, who will have these responsibilities and how we can manage all the activities that I mentioned in the previous slide. So the safety committees and clubs is a good example about how they can take the lead on that and secure the maintenance with minimal resources. Disaster risk reduction curricula. So how we can integrate elements into the curriculum in formal and informal extracurricular activities. School safety events, as I just mentioned, like the World Disaster Days and other ones. And we need to scale up and promoting accountability. Scale up because this is not going to be the only project of construction of schools that we will have. So we try to make as much as possible the engagement of the community for the long term, not only for the maintenance, but for other projects that will come. So we need to make public commitments. We need to educate funders as well. Share lessons about how this project was implemented good, what were the challenge, what was the advantage, how I solved the project in order that others can learn from my experience. Enhance internal capacity. Also, all these lessons learned are helping us to better improve the techniques for construction, the techniques for maintenance, the techniques for developing a better hazard map, vulnerability assessment, etc., etc., etc. And also, it helps us to establish policy tools and mechanisms for regulation and funding. So when we have more documented issues about community-based engagement on school construction, we can better improve this specific approach and in that way generate a better culture of safety. So some final considerations before going to the overlapping. So the key principles of community-based safe school construction. So we have essential principles and good practice principles. So the essential principle is to build safe schools and strike weak ones. Engage as partners, ensure technical oversight, build upon local knowledge, and develop capacity and bolster livelihoods. On the good practices, key principles: support a culture of safety, what I just mentioned in my previous slide. Scale up and promote accountability. Accountability should be one of the key aspects in order to secure schools worldwide. Some case studies that we have seen in sub-Saharan Africans. In Ghana, typically communities contribute to build schools. So the contributions that come from the communities normally are on labor, on materials, sometimes cash for contractors. So the community collects money to contract a specific private sector company that will do a specialized or focalized solve a problem. And community elders notably monitor the construction to ensure that obligations are met. So we see that seen for children until the grandpas. They can be all together here working on securing safe school construction, like in the case in Ghana. In Democratic Republic of Congo, communities informally build most of the schools. Congo has been suffering from a conflict since many years, and in this country, many schools has been built by their own community. There is sometimes some lack of local government's presence of the government or of the state in some communities, so they need to go and build their own schools. In Mozambique, more than 16,000 school buildings were constructed, and half of them were built by communities with the local available materials. So we are talking about 8,000 schools that were built in Mozambique using the community as a key driver and as a key source for building those schools. So some guidance were provided in order to secure that 8,000 schools were built in a good way. So it's something that is happening already, community school safe construction. In Kenya, for instance, until 2003, community-based school construction was financed entirely by the communities, with the government providing teachers for completing the schools. So in Kenya, until 2003, it was the communities were building the whole schools, and when everything was ready and fulfilling all the necessary requirements and standards is when the government was providing the different elements like teachers, administrative staff, in order to develop these things. So the first kickoff effort was coming from communities before governments takes their own responsibilities. So community safe school construction is something that are nowadays part of the elements that we are seeing in the different countries. It doesn't have to be rural communities. We can have community engagements in neighbors, in big cities. We can have any kind of community engaged on community construction. And we can see safe learning facilities either the new ones or the existing ones, as an opportunity to engage in community and as transmitting the message that we need for creating more resilient societies. So thank you for your attention. It has been a pleasure to be with you on this module 3. We have saw during the last 3 videos the key considerations between new schools and existing schools. We have set in the scene about the different processes that need to be done in both of them. We have done the assimilation of this different process. We discuss each of the 8 steps that are normally implemented in any construction project. It is a new one or retrofitting. Then we analyze the overlapping of Pillar 1 on safe learning facilities with Pillar 2 on disaster risk management and with Pillar 3 on disaster risk resilient educations. And now we finalize with this video about how we integrate communities in order to make how we use safe learning facilities to integrate communities and to build a culture of resilience from the community perspective and to the whole society. So thank you for your attention. Now we're gonna leave you with another video from my colleague Wilfred Longa, who is going to present some case studies in Southern East Africa, and that will show you in more detail what I have finalized here. For instance, he will mention something on Mozambique, but also he will be talking about South Africa. Thank you for your attention. I hope that you have enjoyed this Module 3, that you are enjoying the whole MOOC, and I will see you next week when we will be discussing about Module 4, that is on the Pillar 2 of the Comprehensive School Safety Framework on school disaster management. Have a nice day.